So you message Merlino for legal advice, basically, right? You message him for legal advice, and the ramifications of that is you get arrested. Well, it
Yeah,
starts
essentially, I was
because of the business cards, though. But they bring up Joey Merlino in court to be sensational.
yes. Yeah, all stuff at that point that wasn't an issue until they got this phone call, because my messaging him on Instagram took place in like it was the middle of December. The shoveling snow was like I believe it was the middle of January. But basically this violation was brought around middle of February after they said they got this phone call. And I have proof of all this. On the videos I posted on my channel, I read out and put screenshots from the admin warrant and things like that to try and document exactly what had happened. But the takeaway was somebody at the school was agitated that I was protesting, and they used probation as a intimidation technique, and probation had to scramble the higher ups, I guess, to figure out something. So they kind of reached to these obscure conditions.
An all-new and major organized crime bust. 23 people under arrest now accused of stealing guns and cash.
Today, police revealed 4 organized crime groups are wreaking havoc.
From aggravated robbery to kidnapping, burglary, and more. Let's take a look at this. New pictures from court documents in this case. These are a few of the people who have been charged, and investigators say the money, tens of thousands of dollars, is all stolen.
Welcome to this episode of Chattin with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Liam Schofield. What's up, man?
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, thank you.
So you have a really interesting story, and it has a lot of relations to organized crime, believe it or not. There's a connection there, right?
Yes.
So let's start off by introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and then we'll get into the story.
Right. So again, I'm Liam Schofield. I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, and I've been involved in the justice system, unfortunately, for almost 8 years now, since 2016. And that's basically what led to what had happened that I posted some videos about on my YouTube channel, The Lion's Truth, here on YouTube.
So what was your first experience with the justice system?
So in 2016, I was lawfully carrying a firearm here in the city of Wilmington, and I was arrested by a organization called Safe Streets, or the Governor's Task Force. The long story short, the person that arrested me, I later learned, was a dirty officer named Thomas Looney, and he basically said the gun was concealed when it was in fact open. And I fought the case, and I've taken a plea, and I've been on probation ever since. That's the cliff notes.
So why would you take a plea if you weren't guilty?
So when I was out on bail and I was fighting the case, some things ended up happening as far as me being overwhelmed, and I missed a court date, and bail was revoked. I was placed in Department of Corrections, and I was told by my attorney at the time that the plea I was being offered was a go-home plea. And basically, otherwise you can just sit here indefinitely till trial, and they're going to get a conviction anyway. So I signed the plea. I was told it would be a short period of probation. I'd be eligible for a pardon and expungement, but that ended up not being the case, because I learned in this state and others, probation has ways of just dragging on and on and on. And here we are.
And they have you jumping through all kinds of hoops and things like that, right? So what was
Yes.
your experience like on probation? How did it start to be a problem?
So when I was on probation, my mother, she's very staunchly conservative and very pro-Second Amendment. My entire family is. And so when probation came to do a home visit and she was discovered and admitted that she had her gun, I was rearrested and violated for what I was told was like constructive possession. And those charges ended up being dropped because she freely admitted it was her firearm and that she had deceived them basically and didn't tell them that it was there and whatever. But the judge that I had imposed a no contact order with my mother, even though she's never been in legal trouble in her life. And so when I began violating that order, the courts had no mercy, and it resulted in an aggregate of 5 years prison time.
They gave you 5 years in prison?
Well, in installments, each violation merited separate punishments. And also there's a reinstatement. So that prolongs the probation. In the state of Delaware, every time you get found guilty of a violation, they start the clock over. So in addition to the jail time, then there's another period of probation.
So you get your first violation, right? And what happens after that? You go to jail, they end up dropping the charges, it starts probation over. And what was your next run-in with the problems with probation?
So basically, because I'm diagnosed with autism, the way they dropped the charges and they offered me a program called mental health court, and this was back in 2018. And so the charges were dropped, the violation for the probation stood, and so basically the sentence became complete that program. But with that was the stipulation to have no contact with my mother. When I broke that stipulation, that judge was very angry, and she imposed 2 years level 5 with a reinstatement.
Now what? So why did they make it a no contact with your mother? Like, what was the reason for that?
So basically, Judge Roccanelli, who was the judge at the time, she's now retired from the bench, she said that she identified my mother as an unindicted co-conspirator. And so that's another term I learned about. I've learned a lot going through this, but it's basically a concept under the law that somebody they've never been arrested, but a judge can basically find them to be a bad influence or like a bad actor in a set of circumstances. So when the judge said that about my mother, she used that as the lawful authority to impose the no contact. And so when I broke the order, that gave her the authority. She couldn't do anything to my mother, but she was able to incarcerate me. And so that's something I'm continuing to deal with. I'm complying with the order now because I've been put in jail so many times. But I mean, it's caused a whole bunch of side consequences and things like that. And it's something I'm trying to fight against. But that was an offshoot of the mental health program, which ironically, I was never able to complete it, which was unfortunate because part of that arrangement would have been a clean slate upon graduation.
Yeah.
And I would have left the system with no criminal record. But when I withdrew from the program, of course, that didn't happen either. So
now it's like starting over again, right? And
yes.
you're back at square one after that. So what happens next when you get out again out of that?
Well, as long as I'm compliant with them, which I'm doing, even though it's killing me, that's why I've been putting a lot of these videos up, because basically their mindset is as long as I don't have contact with my mother, I adhere to the stipulations, then, you know, eventually it's going to run out. Right now, the time up on probation would be like next February. The date's gotten extended every time I violate it. So I'm trying to work for that to be sooner. The probation officer that I have now has been pretty empathetic, and he's trying to push things along, but he identifies ultimately it's up to the judge. So he is trying to do, because after almost 8 years of this, it's just going in circles. So
it seems like it'll never end, right?
That's what it feels like. It's very disheartening.
Yeah, I was on drugs and alcohol for a long time, and I was always in the legal system. I spent a lot of time in prison. I'd get out, I'd have probation, I'd violate the probation, I'd get out. It was constant in and out of prison. It was never going to stop until I got sober. But I feel like you are not the type of person that even needs to be in the legal system. I feel like they're playing games with you.
I definitely agree. Everybody involved in this feels the same way. There's a lot of people who have come forward to try and help me, my therapist, family, friends. And that's kind of what led to the violation that I mentioned on the channel when Merlino's name had come up, because one of the consequences that has happened is I was a college student at Wilmington University. And as far as I can tell, a probation officer I previously had assigned to my case made a false complaint to them. And without them hearing my side of it, they blocked me from re-enrolling. Well, they told me I could re-enroll. Then I got a letter a couple days later, and I covered this on my channel as well, saying basically, we don't want you here because you have a criminal record and too bad. Then they tried to walk it back when they were confronted by some people from this state, because here in Delaware, they actually have a law, I believe it's Senate Bill 14, passed by criminal justice advocate Senator Marie Pinckney, that actually prohibits that, specifically, that conduct. So I began to a grassroots protest, and one of my family friends is a lobbyist with the Coalition for Open Government. We were going down Dover, we were meeting with senators. I printed up business cards that linked to a petition on change.org with a QR code, and I was passing them out. meeting with people, putting the cards in mailboxes. And according to, and this, I did a video at this as well on the channel, according to admin warrant from probation, official from Wilmington University called them to complain. And as a direct result of that phone call, they basically violated my probation on these obscure criteria. I'd been fully compliant with the no contact, so they cited things like me having crossed state lines to shovel snow. I'm heavily monitored. They have me on a GPS ankle bracelet, and they have monitoring on my phone. So they cited me having shoveled snow, which they were aware of for 3 weeks, had initially said it was no problem, put a violation on that. And they seemed to really not like me speaking out. So for whatever reason, I'm allowed to do YouTube, but not like other social media platforms. So I had messaged Mr. Merlino on Instagram because I've seen that he is a big criminal justice reform advocate. He has a platform up, and I basically shot him a message about a couple things. And this was back, and I think it was December, I want to say. It was before Christmas. Probation never said they had an issue with it. But then when they were looking for reasons to violate me because Wilmington University complains about this business card, then they lead with, in the admin warrant, Liam was talking to Philadelphia mob boss Joseph Merlino. Like, I'm doing something illegal by just talking to the guy on Instagram. That all of a sudden is a problem. So my lawyer stood up at court. He said the state is obviously trying to be salacious with their commentary because it's not a crime to talk to Joey Merlino on Instagram. But essentially they cited these different obscure things. And the end result was I was released, and the judge basically said, he asked probation, is it safe to say we wouldn't be here if it were not for the phone call from Wilmington University? Probation responded, yes, Your Honor. And the judge said, okay, I'm going to release Mr. Schofield, but I would encourage you as you're protesting Wilmington University to tread lightly how you proceed. So I just took that to be basically a threat or an intimidation technique because I was basically just sidelined for 2 weeks because of a business card.
Wow, that's insane. So you message Merlino for legal advice, basically, right? You message him for legal advice, and the ramifications of that is you get arrested. Well,
yeah, essentially, I was
because of the business cards, though. But they bring up Joey Merlino in court to be sensational.
Yes. Yeah, all stuff at that point that wasn't an issue until they got this phone call, because my messaging him on Instagram took place in like it was the middle of December. The shoveling snow was like, I believe it was the middle of January. But basically this violation was brought around middle of February after they said they got this phone call. And I have proof of all this. On the videos I posted on my channel, I read out and put screenshots from the admin warrant and things like that to try and document exactly what had happened. But the takeaway was somebody at the school was agitated that I was protesting, and they used probation as a intimidation technique, and probation had to scramble the higher ups, I guess, to figure out something. So they kind of reached to these obscure conditions, and
And they put a thing on your phone too, right? That tracks you type thing. Like it follows everything you do.
Yeah, that's how they knew that I messaged Mr. Merlino to begin with. And their justification for that was because I have broken the no contact with my mother so many times. They wanted to be able to monitor on my phone exactly who I'm calling and when. And the last violation I had gotten for breach of no contact, I had gotten another phone, and they found me with it. And basically I got a violation for that. This was back in the fall. And so at that time, I told the judge, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I'm no good to my elderly mother if I keep being in jail. So I'll comply with what you say. And the initial deal, as it was told to me, for lack of a better term, was if I was compliant, it would be revisited after the new year. Ironically, that never happened. And when I went to court and I mentioned to Judge Jones, okay, we're here because this Wilmington University thing, but I haven't fully compliant with the no contact, and you told me we would discuss that. And he said, well, that's not unnoticed by me. I appreciate your compliance, but I'm not prepared to talk about that today. And there's been no further comment on him since. To, like I said, the probation officer I have is kind of trying to push it more so than the judge. And I find that really disappointing because I've done what I was told, and the judge is not following through with what he said would be basically the incentive for my compliance at this point.
Yeah, if you ever say you asked probation, I need to go out of state to shovel snow. Make sure you get it in writing that they agree.
Well, yeah, and that was not something I knew I would be doing. It was an honest mistake. The issue about it, like I went over in the video when I addressed this, it was a temp agency. I was under the impression it would be within the state of Delaware. The owner of the temp agency didn't know. Now, probation called me and they spoke to the crew boss, and they spoke to me while we were actually on the road working. And basically the officer said, this is, no big deal. Just don't let it happen again. I understand it was an accident. Next time, please get clarity from your boss before you take a job. And that was basically it. And I left the office. And then the next office visit I left and I was fine. And the next office visit I left and I was fine. And then it was the one after that where I'm in there and he suddenly slaps the cuffs on. And he basically is saying it's about this.
Walk me through. They put that tracker on your phone, right? How long from when they put the tracker on your phone until you message Merlino?
So the tracker had been on my phone since, I believe it was the end of August, and I messaged Mr. Merlino in December, and they would have been aware of that. Everything that I was doing was monitored. They had no issue with it, and that's the main issue that I had was, A, they're trying to be sensational, obviously, by putting his name in it, but B, the whole thing was about Wilmington University, because if they had an issue, they would have known in December, and the PO that I had at the time was actually a different one. He would have just said, hey, I don't like that you did this. I'm violating you, or don't do it again. But the fact that basically a couple months had transpired, they can't claim ignorance because they're seeing everything in real time. The same with the snow shoveling. Like the day that happened, because the GPS monitor, they know I'm in Pennsylvania. They're talking to me. They're talking to the crew boss. We talk through the whole scenario. They say, don't let it happen again. And then the violation comes about a month later.
So walk me through the violation when you go in there that day.
So I went in there that day. The officer, I'd only been assigned for, I think it was 3 to 4 weeks, because the other one I had, it went to administration. So this guy's name was Wilson. I go in there. I sit down across from him. It starts off like a normal visit. Typically, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, they'll ask you routine questions. Have you had police contact? Have you changed your address, your phone number, anything we should know about, basic stuff. So there's no indication I'm in any kind of trouble. He says to me, I have something that I kind of have an issue with, but we can save it for another time and talk about it another time. And I said, well, I'm waiting for a court date. I'm being fully compliant. If you have an issue with something I'm doing and you don't tell me, I can't do differently. And he kind of spins around his chair and he's like, okay, well, I feel like you haven't been doing your probation to the fullest, everything that, you should be doing. And I'm like, well, how's that? Because Officer Christ, who has been on my case from the beginning, we were getting along fine. And you haven't indicated there's any problems except for the shoveling snow. And he's like, you know what? Stand up, put your hands behind your back. I'm like, excuse me? He's like, I can't talk to you about this anymore. We just got to go to the judge. I just got to do this. And so I don't even know initially what I'm in trouble for. So at that probation office, they walk you out the back and there's a car waiting, a state fleet vehicle that would take you to the jail. So he's sitting in the front seat with another probation officer who's driving the vehicle. So I'm trying to talk to him through like the safety cage thing that like, so you can't jump across the seat.
Yeah, you're like, what am I going back for, man? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so he basically starts to explain a little bit more. And he's like, well, you were told not to use social media and we have evidence you did that. And I said, well, everything that I've been doing, Officer Christ told me was okay. We had, basically the parameters worked out and you never told me anything different when you became my officer. So how could I adhere to it? And he's like, well, it's bigger than that. There's more to it than that. But I'm not going to get into that now. I'm going to wait till we go in front of the judge. Well, I didn't know until I met with my lawyer that basically he probably didn't have much of an idea because the higher ups basically were saying, just book him because we're getting a call from this angry trustee. But I didn't know that yet. When I meet with my lawyer basically starts to read the admin warrant to me. And like I go over on the video on my channel, it starts off with, we get a phone call from a trustee. They're concerned about a business card. They complained. This is due to Liam not being accepted in school. And then it goes into he shoveled snow. He messaged Mr. Merlino. So I'm like talking to my lawyer. So basically this is a violation about a business card. The other stuff's window dressing. And he's like, I agree. It's absurd, but we have to go to the judge. We have to talk about it. And then when we did go to the judge, like I said, basically the judge let me out immediately. But he said, be careful when you're, challenging the university. And it's really hard to get transparency on a lot of these things because, I'm just the guy who's on probation. So a lot of people don't want to hear my side of it, but it's like, in this country, we're supposed to have First Amendment rights. I have the right to hand out business cards. I have the right to protest appropriately, things that I have an issue with. You're not supposed to be able, just because you have privilege or power because you're a university, to silence me and use my probation to do so.